Welcome, everybody, to Conveyor's webinar with our incredible panel. We are so excited today to talk about AI agents, how they are taking over a lot more of the landscape, and how we can have a learning discussion together. So we have a really fun agenda today. Our first 5 minutes, we're going to meet the panel. We're then going to demystify what actually is an AI agent. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but we definitely want to ground the audience in what we mean when we say AI agents. And then the meat of our conversation is going to be a panel discussion with this incredible group that we have. I'm extremely excited to introduce our panel. We have Patricia, we have Patrick, we have Jodi, and we have Joe. I'm going to pass it over to Patrick first. Patrick, could you please introduce yourself? Tell us your role, your name, the company you work for, and how you've been incorporating AI into your life so far professionally.
Hi, sure. I am Patrick Lonergan. I am the VP of Legal and Compliance at CircleCI. We have a big company focus on using AI. So lots of agents. We have lots of different use cases that we're exploring. We use Conveyor for questionnaires, of course, but we also have internal agents that we use that we can answer questions or ask questions to. We have other groups that are using agents to answer support inquiries. And so one of the things we're actually exploring is, do we really need all these different agents? And is there sort of one agent to rule them all? Trying to see if having like really specialized agents is necessary, or if maybe there's one, because a lot of them are being trained using the same data. So that's kind of something we're looking at. So yeah, all kinds of stuff. We're really excited about AI and CircleCI.
Thank you for joining, Patrick. Can't wait to hear even more about that. And next on to Jodi.
Hey everyone, my name's Jodi Jeannette. I'm a cybersecurity manager for HireRight, working currently from Maine. I had an unfortunate use case when we got together about using AI, and that is during a series of layoffs when I had a slew of basically recommendation letters to really great staff members who lost their positions. I was able to put in my bullet points into just ChatGPT and pump out first draft of a bunch of recommendation letters so that we could get those out to people pretty quickly. A pleasant use case, but it is a great way to kind of get your ideas down onto paper and then take the time to figure out how to adjust those manually with a human in the loop approach at the end.
Yeah, not all use cases are the most fun, but they are productive, and so it's really cool to watch how people learn to use it in different ways. All right, Patricia, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Patricia. I'm part of the Trust Services team in Docusign. My team is responsible for assisting our customers in relation to all information security topics. So the way that we're using AI is just to help us do that. We are a big company, so we get loads of questions and questions from our customers, and loads of them are very, very similar. So the way that we're using is using AI to help us answer those questionnaires and try to give us some time back to focus on any other tasks that the team needs to.
Thank you, Patricia. And Joe, over to you to bring it home.
Hey, Joe Veroneau on the Trust and Security team here at Conveyor. Mostly here just have front row seats to the awesome panel here and hear how other companies are using AI.
All right, and with that, I thought it might be wise for us to sit down and say, AI agents, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot going on. We've probably all heard that, and we will continue to hear that throughout the rest of 2025. And so we wanted, for purposes of our audience today, to spend a couple of minutes of just at least grounding ourselves. This is a learning exercise. And the objective is to learn together, to learn from our panel, and to come away with something new that we can bring back to our organizations or own for ourselves internally. And so we're going to do three things. We're going to talk about WTF is an AI agent. We're going to understand why is everybody talking about them and what's in it for me? Why should I really care? Why should I pay attention? So AI agents are not traditional software. When we think of traditional software, we think of a lot of code, right? We have to define every edge case. We have defined all of the goals in advance. We've defined all of the outcomes in advance. All of that code that we designed was designed to efficiently get to the outcome that is always known in advance. What are we doing? We're writing code. We're not like instructing something. And the last thing is, if anybody here has tried to implement software at any company, I have a pretty strong suspicion that if you then try to change that software in 3 months, 6 months time, you go to IT, you have to prioritize a project. Something tells me it's a little bit more than challenging. And that's because they're not really flexible. If we think about what an AI agent is, it is none of those things. And that's what makes them very unlike traditional software. AI agents look like the beginnings of the LLMs that we're all starting to familiarize ourselves with, like ChatGPT and Claude, but they do a few things that are unique. We define them as four things in particular. They plan, they research, they act, and they critique. Some people use different words. They say, they don't critique, they learn. True. All of those things can be the same. But the thing that makes an AI agent unique is that they're kind of like the goal seek function in Excel. For anybody who's used Excel before, before, you know that the goal seek function is all about an outcome and how are all the variables that I can optimize in order to get to that outcome. That makes them super powerful, means that we can interact with them with natural language, but it also makes them very uncertain and in some cases dangerous. You need to have good guardrails. You need to have good escalations. You got to audit what they're doing and make sure that they're like performing. And so to call these things traditional software, which is where a lot of like, let's be honest, the marketing hype is right now, is kind of minimizing the impact that I think we're going to see with a lot of these really powerful software components that are going to come online very soon. We still have a bunch of slap-on LLMs that kind of look like agents, but this is still not the agentic description that I used in that last slide. So on the far left, we have a lot of things that put an LLM into something. There's the input, you have the process, you have the output. The LLMs are still not agents because they have to collaborate across systems and we need to trust them. They need an architecture on who to communicate with and how. Got to have that thing on Rails. And they need to work across the apps. It's not enough to just say, oh, the LLM works within my product. What happens when these agents are using LLMs across products, from Word to your CRM to Docusign to CircleCI to HireRight? There's so many apps that we need to chain together, and that's the future of where a lot of agents are moving towards. We also know that performance isn't guaranteed. There's a lot of oversight required on these. So the agents that you see on the far right of the screen are ones that are perceiving and sensing their environment. They're optimizing, and every time that they run into an issue, they need to pull in a human being. And so we are probably all in the case of not wanting to relinquish too much control until we can see them working. We can feel like we have a lot of confidence in their outcomes and their outputs driving for those outcomes. Say is that, hey, this cycle's got a lot of hype in it. Is there anything different going on right now? Are they smart? Sometimes not quite so much, but they're very good at reasoning. 99 out of 100 times, I bet, these things reason better than most human beings. And there's a lot of money flowing into this space too on agents. It's probably why we hear so much about it. It's hard to ignore that investment. A lot of these companies will go kaboom. Some of these companies will go giant, but we're going to solve some really interesting problems. And that is what I think is so exciting about a session like this, is where we get to talk about those problems and be honest about where they're good and where they're bad. The last thing I'll say is that the tough market that we are currently in is probably going to be the new norm. When we think about why agents, well, we're seeing the expectations in many of our orgs go up. We're seeing the resources stay flat, and headcount might stay flat or even go down in many cases. And so the way to survive is more productivity. And when we have more opportunities to invest to drive that productivity, I think for a lot of us, we're feeling this is kind of like our way to keep our head above water. So I will close with the last slides that you'll have to see from me on the next one and say, this is about learning. We are at the very beginning of this cycle. We are in the experimentation phase. We came here to learn together and to shape our understandings collectively of how agents are going to be good, how they're not going to be so good, and that's the purpose, is to learn together. And so with that, I would love to turn it over to our panel right now and start to have that exact conversation. There are a lot of potentials and concerns about this. Patrick, Jodi, and Patricia, we have discussed them a lot. Patricia, maybe I'd like to start with you this time. You know, what are the things that are nervous for you when you think about AI and AI agents? What are the things that are exciting for you when you think about this space?
I think, as I mentioned before, I'm part of a team that's customer facing. So what makes me nervous is just giving that full control over anything that goes directly to our customers. So AI agents can handle repetitive and time-consuming tasks, which is great. That's all we want. We all want to just get rid of them. But if you're working for a customer-facing team, you need to ensure that that information that they're providing is accurate and really answers the questions that the customer is asking you. So I think it can be useful for that first draft, but that human review is key to ensure the accuracy and the completeness. So great to get rid of that repetitive task, but I think that full control is probably something I would be a bit more hesitant to completely give.
I know, Patrick, you've thought a lot about full control too, and you had some interesting ideas that you've been thinking about. How do you think about, control?
I mean, certainly we have the same issue that Patricia has, where we're worried about the customer when they ask a question and get an answer, they're expecting that answer to be accurate. And I'm not sure we have total confidence that the agents can just do that without supervision. One issue that we're also, we want to meet our customers where they are. So some of our customers' appetite for AI is not the same as ours. And so we have to be mindful of, we have customers that are like, you can never send our data to an LLM. And we have to basically do the right thing for those customers, plus our customers who are more like us. And so we're trying to figure out what's the right way to do that, where we're respecting the customer's boundaries, but also, I don't know, I view it as, to some extent, we're helping our employees, right? We're taking away the tasks that are not fun so that they can do the work that it's more challenging, more interesting. And then I guess just, kind of thinking about just how we can, I don't know, I really do go back to the one agent to rule them all idea. I like that because then we're already training all these things using the same data. Then we sort of have one that we have to perfect versus everyone's kind of fine tuning theirs. So that's something that's really, I guess, top of mind for me is how can we invest in one versus all of it? Everyone at CircleCI kind of using their own specialty one. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
I would also like to live in a world where, like, the old one choke to throat or one throat to choke when it comes to like all the security components would be very nice.
Well, that's actually the other thing. I mean, if to the extent that there's risk in using these AI companies that are doing this stuff, it's a lot easier to invest in one versus investing in 5 that are potentially, or 10 or whatever, that are, that's 10 potential security challenges. So
for companies that are risk averse as well, just having a smaller selection of agents or LLM solutions, or however we want to call them, AI solutions, is going to be a lot easier from a governance perspective because there's so much attention that has to go into the security of that build ahead of actual use and how that data that goes into the LLM is going to be processed. So in terms of best practice, I think that the thing that is going really well with what Conveyor has is that the information that is used is curated specifically by the teams. So you have control over what data is being pulled and what data it's a controlled environment. And then you also have a human on the outside at the end point of reviewing what the output is after you've already controlled what will go into that output to review for simple things like, if you have a specific customer, for example, that has a specific contract that you need to go in and edit, I think it's a responsible and ethical practice to go in and ensure that each of those items is correct, not just in terms of the governance or company policy, but also what that customer is expecting from you on your agreements.
You bring up such an interesting point, Jodi, because you start to describe a world where the humans and the agents are working together. And also with Patrick's world, if you have the one agent to rule them all, now you can manage a suite. But we all live in apps daily. Like, how many apps are each of us logging in probably after this meeting? I would guess no fewer than 10. And I would imagine that there's a world where we have to manufacture a new working environment with these apps. So I guess I'd be curious to hear, what does it look like when we think about the line between a human responsibility and an AI responsibility, and the way all of this is going to shift soon? And what are the things that you want to keep human, and the things that you want to keep AI, automation? Maybe Jodi, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Patricia and Patrick.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty controversial answer for that, which is that the human is always responsible. You have a job to do, you have a responsibility to your clients, you have a responsibility to your company. And so if you're choosing to use a tool, you are ultimately responsible for the output of the tool. And that could be as simple as, working with the engineers that are developing the tool to make sure that the output is exactly as you'd expect and the functionality is as you'd expect, and data classification and handling and all that are exactly as you'd expect. And then remembering that AI is a tool. And so AI is a means to an end, but is not you. You are still you, responsible for your output, your job.
I completely agree. Just jumping on what you're saying. From my experience on how I use AI, it is there to make my lives, my team lives easier. You obviously maximize the productivity of it, but there are certain tasks that you can't hand over. I think you always have to just keep that fresh pair of eyes to have a look at what the AI did, and just cannot hand over any type of job to AI. I think there's a line there that it's there. It's very, very close. It's there to help us, but it cannot replace us. I think the other point of it is that AI won't ever be able to assist in creating that trust relationship with a customer. I think there's regulations, there's certain geographies, certain types of industries that still require that. Although you can provide them all sort of answers where AI can help you provide that type of information, they will always want to jump in a quick call with you, clarify their points, ask you even more questions than you can imagine. So yeah, AI is there to help us, but the responsibility, as you said, is ultimately on us to just make the most of it.
I'm very excited for taking my first draft part of my job.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the first draft example is really how I view it is it gets you off the ground and then the human is there to, sort of verify this is the output you'd expect and make sure it's ready for the customer. I do think there's, at least for us, there's probably a little bit of a difference when we're thinking about an external facing AI agent versus an internal one. I don't think we expect the same level of perfection for an internal one. So an internal one might be helpful because obviously, just like I'm sure everyone else, we have, like you said, 10,000 apps. Not always the easiest to find thing. One thing we found is that internal AI agents can be a great way for people to find things. And if it's like Conveyor or another tool that says, here's the answer and here's why I think that's the answer, and kind of gives you, then it allows an internal person to go and verify on their own that this is the correct answer, versus an external person who might not have that same ability. So I would say the expectations we have for an external versus an internal agent are a little different, unless your external facing agent is really clear that, hey, this is AI generated. No promises here that this is right, and maybe that's something you could do based on cost or support levels or whatever. And that's of course another thing we're thinking about all the time. So
I always like the external internal breakdown because I agree there's something very obvious. Some information needs to be dead on when it goes outside the company. Other information can, be a little bit, more experimental, and we can see what happens. So I'd be curious to hear from the group when we're first trying to experiment with these new technologies like security, compliance, legal. I mean, these functions in a business usually are the first functions to say, hey, let's get like this thing under real good control. But I've noticed that a lot of these functions are the ones that are experimenting the most too. I'd be curious to hear from the group. What was the experience that you had getting comfortable with trying an AI agent, trying it internally or externally, and kind of like getting your own self on board while the other business units were also thinking about the same thing? Patricia, maybe let's start with you.
I think in my case, there was a lot of use case testing. We tested every possible angle that we could imagine, and we definitely required high level of accuracy in the answers, on top of obviously a high level of security in the software that we were going to adopt. So that was a must. I think once all that was ensured, probably we had to learn to kind of be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I'm part of a team that is based all over the world, and as such, you answer questions from different regions, and some customers are a little bit more strict than others in the way that they want the information. So apart from all that, everyone has a different preference and different way of answering questions. So we had to learn to be okay with how the AI was giving you the answer. Just leave your personal bias aside. Just be like, okay, is the answer providing you the accurate information? Yes, then that's probably then good enough. We can obviously tweak it in that second draft that the human is doing, just maybe add a little bit more info based on the geography, or personalize it based on our contract. So it was a little bit of learning. It's still a bit of learning. It's a learning curve, and just get used to it basically. But obviously, assuming all that test case, security and accuracy was the top things that we had to look for.
I'll jump in. For us, I would say I totally agree with all of that. I think as we started exploring AI tools, one thing that we did was we talked to like existing users at other companies, like, hey, what's your experience with this tool? How's that going for you? What are the challenges? What are you seeing? And people we knew or trusted for one reason or another. So I think a lot of times a personal reference and stuff like this helps you get more comfortable when you're uncomfortable or exploring a new area. We also, as we were adding information to these tools, we kind of did it in phases, like we'll give access to the less sensitive stuff. And then, so we got more comfortable, sort of added the additional more like a secret or sensitive information. So that's how we got comfortable. But it helps to have a executive team that is really supportive of this kind of initiative, because then you know that you're not, if something goes wrong, you're not way out there on a limb. So
some of the things that were important as well were our ability to control, for example, access control, not just access to our information and the data, but whether or not we could, we have single sign-on, for example, enabled. So it requires our teams to be able to access in a secure way, not just for, in this case, Conveyor, to host the data in a secure way, but it allows us to enforce our own policies against what it is that we're expecting to use. So 90-day identity and access management reviews, for example, are easy both for our team internal and for cutting off access to customers or prospects that want to be able to get into the data. So it just, the customizability and control over some of the security features were extremely important.
I could see what's interesting is I think we heard a few different things. One, Jodi, yours was a very technical, like, hey, we need to convince leadership, like, we can really control this thing. I also heard some interesting things, Patrick, from you and Patricia around like, hey, we have a supportive executive team. We want to try a lot of experiments. But what do you think the world would look like if you didn't have those supportive teams? I mean, do you feel like lobbying for these kinds of tools is like, are we in like the experimental phase? Do you feel like we're in the quickly going to become like, hey, like this is how are we going to do work without them? Like I personally could not go back to doing anything without email, like you or Slack, like take it away from me, like you have to rip it from me. But there's some level of like, how do we, is this an easy sell, a hard sell? Not Conveyor necessarily, but like AI in general within orgs.
From a technical perspective, I don't mind saying that it's a hard sell when you're in an industry that's regulated. There are so many unbelievable hoops that must be jumped through in order to kind of get people on board, because the smallest bit of risk in a regulated industry is, it's often unacceptable. And so it takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more time to get teams on board because everything has to be done so methodically. And frankly, in a regulated industry, it really should be, especially with the threat landscape currently. I think everybody has to handle everything with big gloves, but that's just kind of the environment that I'm in, a bit more risk averse.
I completely agree. I think you need to respect the fact that those rules and regulations are there for a reason, and make sure that the AI is used in an ethical and safe way. So it all depends a little bit on, apart from that, it depends a bit on the AI appetite that the company has. So if it's kind of there, you just need to make sure that you've done that thorough review of the software that you want to use, explain that business case, make sure you sell it to the company just to show the benefit that the company would get to. Goes back obviously to just jumping in a specific example, how big your team is. Do you need to look for efficiencies? You need to prove basically that if you're jumping in the boat, you are covered in every single way. So it depends a lot on the use case, the company, the industries, the regions. But if that appetite is there to jump a little bit on board, just show that you've done your due diligence, do your research, and make sure you have a strong business case.
Yeah, I think for us, and I think a lot of companies, we have the resource constraints and we have to find those efficiencies. And this is, for me, it's such an obvious way for the really mundane, easy tasks. And so I think companies, and maybe I don't work at a highly regulated company, so I do see the differences when I'm dealing with our highly regulated customers. But I think so many companies are going to realize that there's only so much you can squeeze out of people. And if you don't want to add people, then you've got to find other ways. And this is just such an easy way to do it, particularly when you're not planning to use it with sensitive data, or you're not, potentially profiling people or whatever. If you're using it to write first drafts of text-based answers, at some point, I think people are going to realize it's not that much more risky than storing, text in a contract management system with Docusign or whatever it is. If you trust the company you're doing business with, and there's always a little bit of like a leap of faith that they're going to, do the security things they contractually promised they would. And I'm hoping that we'll get to a place, at least for the less sensitive use cases, where everyone realizes that this is just the new reality.
Yeah, just to add on there, companies tend to invest a lot of money in their certifications and reports that we make available to customers. So just bringing it to kind of my use case, we all know that there's customers that, although you spend all that money, the certifications still require the questionnaire to be completed. So it's just a way of maybe using that business case to show, look, you've already invested all this money into the certifications to have that a strong information security team. Let's try to leverage the investment and try to focus those security professionals into different, just avoid the monotonous tasks, repetitive questionnaires. They all tend to ask more or less the same questions unless they're targeted to a specific topic. Due diligence questionnaires tend to be more or less the same. So it's just like another point for that strong business case. If that's all, if you have all that money invested in it, let's try to make the most of it.
Which kind of brings me to the human side, the reality check. So the skill set that will be required in more AI, more agentic, yes, more automation, but all of that more AI and more agentic is probably going to look like a slightly different skill set. Jodi, you had a topic that I remember we talked about in our chat, which I thought was super fascinating. What in your mind do you think is going to start looking like different skills that become more important for you and your org?
Yeah, so my team is a GRC team and we build customer trust. So one of the skills that is really important on my team is design-centric thinking, designing attestation specifically with a user experience in mind. So one of the things that I had shared when we initially met was the consideration between just thinking of any large third-party risk management team that goes through hundreds and hundreds of documents every single week from various vendors, whatever. If they get a questionnaire and the evidence is rogue random screenshot, for example, or, some type of 30-page white paper, you're going to lose their interest. They're not going to dig for the information that you're trying to give them, or they're not going to be able to either way. So what my team has really focused on is creating evidence that is visually digestible. It's designed with the reviewer in mind. And I think somebody had said, I can't remember, I think it was Patrick had said, sounds sort of like you're creating marketing materials. And the fact of the matter is, yeah, we're incredibly proud of the work that we've done and continue to do, and so we're designing it with the end user view in mind now.
I'll jump in because
yeah,
because when we did talk about this and Jodi was mentioning that, I actually thought that was really cool because it's not something I guess I personally had ever thought of, but it totally resonated with me, and it's something I took back and as an idea for our. I guess nominally I run our GRC team, but in reality I have someone who actually knows what they're doing that's running the GRC team, and he loves selling. This is like what he calls it. Our GRC is our competitive advantage. So we spend a lot of time tracking the metrics of what customers are looking at our trust center, what documents they're looking, which ones are resonating more or less, and then we report those metrics out to the organization. And so when I went back to him, just said like, hey, this is another thing that maybe we'll get more engagement, or like he thought that was a cool idea. So I appreciated that insight. I don't know. It just really resonated with me. Another thing that I've noticed, maybe because obviously I'm a lawyer and spend a lot of time writing things, is I have found that the AI tools help our security and GRC people be better writers. And I think that's maybe not always, that was something that when I was hiring people, I really spent a lot of time on it because my experience was that sometimes the people in those roles were less focused on the quality of their writing. And now we have tools that can help them do that better from the get-go. And so that's something that I found to be helpful, I guess, for me personally.
good writing.
On my side, I am customer facing team, so definitely we look for people that have great communication skills, that are happy jumping on calls, that are used to working with different teams, because we're the voice of security for our customers. So we tend to kind of try to be light SMEs about every topic. So we're constantly dealing with engineering, with legal, with all kind of like the teams that really security ends up being, which are all of them. So definitely good communication skills, that are able to think outside the box, and obviously that have some security experience. But that would be the main things. Once we have AI taking over the monotonous stuff, so that's the things definitely I'll be looking for.
It's so interesting because Joe, I'll pass to you. We hear so much about security theater and compliance theater, and how, when you've invested in a lot of really good compliance and security and controls, like, it can be a differentiator, can be an advantage. It depends how you use it, and sometimes that looks like marketing, or other times that looks like better communications, like Patricia, you said. Joe, I know you think about security theater all the time. What do you think of in this conversation? How does that apply in your world?
I mean, some of the discussion we've been having just makes me think of kind of what Jodi mentioned. It makes creativity easier in some degree of sharing an idea and getting an idea ready to share with an audience. This is more from an internal use case, but like, we talk a lot about AI automating like the boring parts of your job, but it can automate the when you don't know where to start. And an example that's come up with me a lot is like making system diagrams or data flows, where you may kind of be staring at the blank whiteboard and thinking, where do I start? And you can really use natural language to describe how you think a system flow works and get a system diagram generated and then bring that to an engineer and have them provide feedback. So something that may have taken 2 or 3 hours of trying to find a starting point, you immediately have something that someone can provide feedback on, you can refine. And so I think it makes it much quicker to generate new detailed artifacts that can then be human reviewed. And that's the other just general theme that's really starting to come out from this discussion for me is, particularly as agents are being personified and be created as an entity, I think there's a lot of parallel for how we treat human resources and team members. I mean, Patrick, you mentioned like doing essentially a background check of like asking other people who have used these tools, how has it performed for you? And Jodi, you talked about access controls. What information does this person have access to what information does this agent have access to? And the area that I'm still struggling at times is like these AI tools are very valiant. They want to try everything. They can't, even as someone who can't sometimes be quiet during a meeting, I understand that they just want to speak up and try to answer, and really understanding what is the capability and level of capability that this tool or workflow has. And then while I'm oversharing here, I do want to comment on Jay's question in the chat. What controls do you recommend to put in place when using AI agents from an AI governance perspective? And I'm going to sound like the boring security compliance guy, but a lot of it is risk assessment. We talked about this too, of who are the impacted parties here, internal or external? What are the things that could go wrong based on how this agent performs, and being able to find ways to like test and see, can it actually perform on this task, and starting small instead of on someone's like first day, giving them the biggest project. And so I think there will continue to be a lot of parallels for how humans are onboarded onto teams and understanding the capability of agents. And then it'll be a whole other world of like performance improvement plans and feedback and agent manager. So I think it's just going to be really a whole new way of organizational behavior and how these agent entities are incorporated into work. So I don't know if I answered your question, Daniel, but I at least got some screen time here.
Well, I'll tell you, I, for one, am like waiting for the day that we're going to put ChatGPT on a pip, and I can't wait to like watch it interact with itself on that. That's going to be a weird one, but we'll find out. I would say for our last topic here, Joe, that was a really good lead in to the fact that the InfoSec role is going to change with AI. My role and Christine's role are also changing with AI. We're navigating what that's going to mean for ourselves, and I'm sure other people are too. Patricia, maybe we'll start with you. If you were to predict, like, what does the InfoSec role look like in 5 years from now, in some period of time, when this stuff is a bigger part of our lives? What's your prediction, and how are you kind of thinking about navigating that change?
I think in my case, as I said, we're a customer-facing role, but unfortunately, we're not getting as much time as we would like to just spend with our customers, go to their offices, jump on calls with them where needed. So I see it like in 10 years, I see us having more time to do this, or hope to have a bit more time to do this. So yeah, jumping on calls more with them, building that trust face-to-face that some customers and regions need, be a bit more of a sales enabler in terms of customer adoption, customer retention. If I think about 10 years ago, it's impossible to even imagine that an InfoSec role would be more customer facing. Everything would have been a little bit more internal probably. So as business evolves, as companies grow in general, you need that kind of customer face time with them. So I think AI would definitely enable that part and give us a little bit more time to just jump on our calls and help our sales teams too.
Jodi, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I think that over time, and hopefully in 5 years, we'll be a little more on board as a society with how AI can help us. I think certainly it's going to have major implications for the threat landscape, but what I'm really hoping is that the increased automation, it actually improves compliance. So I'm hoping that eventually we'll reach a space where AI will be able to help and advise in changes to regulations, changes to specific laws, industry standards, to keep humans kind of accountable for those changes, because they're constant, and globally, how could any one person know every change? So I would like to see that, and as well, on top of the changes to hopefully someday getting intel on compliance input, I think it would be really helpful for AI to take over some of the quantification of risk. I know this is not necessarily directly related to customer trust, but in terms of information security, risk can be very objective. And so I think it would be really helpful for a non-objective tool to be able to quantify risk according to, input risk appetite from business owners, stakeholders, things like that. I'm sure that exists somewhere. If not, somebody get on it.
Yeah, I think for us, we really do view our GRC team as, the competitive advantage. And so, and we have people who are very good on our team with customers and just, really allowing them more time to spend time with customers. I like that idea. And spend time on getting additional certifications, all ways that we can sort of support our sales team more, answer questions for our sales team. We get, help and basically be a sales enablement and revenue driver. We really try and sell our GRC team as a, sort of revenue driving entity. Maybe it's, sort of out of self-preservation, who knows? That's certainly something we're very focused on.
Yeah, I love this theme that I think I hear so much now, and it's a real shift change where it used to be, security was like, compliance, we're never going to talk to a customer. And now it's, hey, like there's more opportunity to shape the outcome. And so I'm not saying that it's like that everywhere, but it's a very interesting theme that I've heard, certainly from this panel, but also through a lot of other conversations as well. We'll spend the next 5 minutes on doing some questions if folks want to put them in now. But all right, we have Jay. What controls? Joe, did we already answer this question?
To some degree, I mean, the risk assessment, thinking about what could go wrong and determining, how do we identify that it has gone wrong and how do we fix it? And then also, I think this came up earlier in the discussion of just like logging and understanding, like having AI systems document what actions they're taking or making it easy for a human to see how an outcome was achieved, because that gives you the ability to provide feedback and refine the process. So trying to set things up in a way that they aren't just a black box and being able to provide feedback or understand what happened, and just more information is better when particularly trying to diagnose why something may not be working.
Any other questions that folks want to add in the chat, please add them now. We'll wait for a moment while you get them in. All right, we might have a very quiet audience today. So with that, you know what they always say, if you can keep it short and sweet, keep it short and sweet. I want to thank our panel so much, Patricia at Docusign, Patrick at CircleCI, Jodi at HireRight. Please reach out to everybody on LinkedIn, or I'm certain we could email folks too if we feel like you can find their emails. Good luck. But I would say, because people are always famously excited to share an email. But what I'll say is this was a really fun discussion. Thank you for joining. The recording will be available after the fact, and please reach out if you have any other questions. And thank you once again to our panel. You guys were incredible. Appreciate it.